Good morning. I'm David Honeyman from the Crime and Corruption Commission. Thank you for joining me today as I discuss the outcomes of our recent local government procurement audit from the perspective of procurement corruption risks. Our audit identified procurement systemic failures and other areas for improvement within local government entities. However, we have found similar systemic failures during our investigations across all forms of government entities. Therefore, the information in today's presentation can apply to all government entities. Today's session shares our observations about how to identify procurement corruption risks so that you will be better equipped to identify systemic issues and to implement improvements to reduce the risk of corruption within your procurement processes. I'll start with a brief overview of the CCC before moving on to the main topic. It has been 30 years since the outcome of the Fitzgerald Inquiry established the Crime and Corruption Commission's predecessor, the Criminal Justice Commission. Our vision and purpose are set out in our strategic plan, and these seek to provide a fair and safe community enabled by our legislated areas of work. We are a relatively small agency of around 360 staff comprising police and civilian investigators, legal officers, intelligence officers, and financial investigators and various other professions. They apply their skills to enable us to solve the most complex issues in order to provide a fair and safe community. The CCC is unique. It's the only integrity agency in Australia with jurisdiction across 4 areas: major crime, corruption, witness protection, and proceeds of crime, and our activities in these areas are supported by our prevention function. Our strategic corruption objectives see us working with our stakeholders when we investigate and oversee investigations into serious and systemic public sector corruption and work with stakeholders to build corruption-resistant public institutions through capability development, advisory, auditing, and strategic intelligence services. In 2021-22, we have 3 key areas of focus: corruption involving elected officials, misuse of confidential information, and exploitation of public sector resources. Exploitation of public sector resources includes procurement and the role of procurement officers and their supervisors and managers. This is a snapshot showing our year-to-date statistics. Importantly for today's session are the results of our corruption investigations, which have resulted in 4 people being charged with 67 criminal offences. These figures do not include the disciplinary action taken against the employees by their employer for lower level breaches. I'll focus a little on our corruption function and our corruption prevention function. The CCC's corruption function includes 3 activities. Firstly, we assess complaints about corrupt conduct. Secondly, we monitor how agencies deal with complaints. And thirdly, we investigate. Where the CCC determines to investigate a complaint, we have a range of special powers we can use, including powers to hold coercive hearings. Whilst we are Queensland-based, we are part of a national effort, and we partner with police and integrity agencies in other states to share intelligence products and operational resources and use our coercive powers in support of other agencies' investigations. Our prevention function is integrated into all of our areas of work for the purposes of understanding how major crime and corruption occurs. We are a learning organisation, and the prevention function in our Act empowers us to actively seek ways to understand the root causes of crime and corruption, how these are enabled, and then work with our stakeholders to inform and assist them implement prevention measures. The need for today's session was driven by what we learnt from our recent audit. Whilst the audit did not detect corrupt conduct, it did identify systemic failures that some of our past investigations identified were significant contributors to instances of corrupt conduct. We are concerned that the systemic failures identified during our audit could create an environment where corrupt conduct may occur. Our expectation is that sharing this information with you today will inform and equip you to proactively review your procurement processes. You will appreciate that in the same way that we are a learning organisation, so are crime and corruption. You'll also appreciate that the names crime and corruption represent a very wide range of multidimensional activities motivated by money, power, and influence. Accordingly, our work is continuously evolving in order to respond to these threats. In March 2021, we completed our local government procurement audit across 4 councils in remote and Indigenous areas. The audit examined where councils have effective procurement processes and practices in place to manage corruption risks. The CCC audit revealed that whilst the required goods or services were delivered, there were shortcomings in evidencing why procurement decisions were made and that the standard of record keeping needed to improve to demonstrate that a systematic process was conducted. Poor record keeping or failure to keep key records are in themselves corruption risks. However, at its most fundamental level, failure to keep accurate and complete records means that decision makers cannot justify to their communities why money was spent, that the purchase achieved value for money, and that the decision to award a procurement contract was free from bias. In addition to the need to keep accurate and complete records, the audit found there was a need to strengthen the procurement governance and processes. The information in today's presentation is for all staff involved in managing effective procurement with probity. These staff include the policy owner, procurement manager, the procurement team, evaluation panel members, and delegates. Our recent procurement audit determined that there was a failure to adequately align procurement to strategic and business plans. This lack of alignment can result in under or oversupply of services or materials, lost opportunities to lock in discounts through bulk buying, and delivery delays due to poor forecasting. A failure to adequately plan the procurement to meet project specifications and deliverables. This can result in supply delays and may threaten project timelines. A failure to adequately document the procurement specifications into the invitation to offer documents. This can result in wastage due to supplied items not being fit for purpose. Further, the audit identified a failure to document the supplier evaluation. This evaluation includes due diligence on the supplier to make sure they have a record of success in the particular procurement area. It also includes a full evaluation of the supplier's response to the ITO to ensure it meets your specifications. A failure to link the evaluation and explain or document the decision. This means that there was insufficient or no documents that evidenced each of the previous steps. This also means that there was insufficient evidence to justify the decision or to demonstrate that the procurement achieved value for money. Lastly, there was a failure to evidence probity considerations. This means there were no or insufficient records to demonstrate that the procurement process was transparent and free from bias. At minimum, there should be a completed conflict of interest declarations supported by an effective conflict of interest management process. Unfortunately, our investigations have revealed that there are people who will take advantage of any system for their own benefit. The reality is that any system is open to improper implements when the people who are part of it are open to opportunities for fraud or corruption, and procurement is no different. Throughout the procurement process, from planning through to evaluating and concluding the procurement, our investigations show that procurement staff and potential suppliers have opportunities to commit fraud and corruption. These opportunities range from bribes, acceptance of gifts or benefits, substandard goods or services, collusion, and release of confidential information. Apart from deliberate wrongdoing, there are other factors that can result in poor procurement outcomes. Examples of these other factors are laziness, fail to properly follow the approved processes, lack of attention to detail, or misplaced trust on the part of the procurement officer. Our investigations have shown that all of these can result in the procurement officer and their supervisors and managers unwittingly enabling fraud or corruption by suppliers. Even a decision to award a contract to a mate, where the procurement officer did not get a benefit, can be corrupt conduct. For these reasons, it is important to implement clear policies and processes to guide employees in their role and to implement checking mechanisms and controls that independently ensure that these processes and policies are followed. For more information about these risks and how to treat them, please see our advisory, Procurement and Contract Management. All people with an involvement in procurement have a role in protecting their organisation from corruption risks. Procurement officers are responsible for assessing products, services and suppliers and negotiating contracts to meet the planned needs of their organisation. Procurement officers are obligated to always act according to the laws, policies and processes applicable to their roles and make their procurement decisions, ensuring that approved purchases are of sufficient quality and are cost efficient. Those who supervise or manage procurement officers must ensure they put in place effective controls and processes to check that the procurement officers act according to the requirements of their role. Failure to do this and to actively monitor these checking mechanisms may constitute corrupt conduct. In addition to this, all staff should be aware of their obligations to act in accordance with the requirements of the Code of Conduct. Their code reflects the ethics principles set out in the Public Sector Ethics Act, which guide all staff behaviours and decisions at all times, including in procurement activities. The ethics principles are integrity and impartiality, promoting the public good, commitments to the system of government, accountability and transparency. It is important to remember that failing to follow the Code of Conduct can result in disciplinary action against you. In managing probity and procurement, council staff must comply with the interlinked contracting principles. These are value for money, open and effective competition, the development of competitive local businesses and industry, environmental protection, and ethical behaviour and fair dealing. The inherent risk of the procurement must also be identified and managed. All procurements contain risk. However, the greater the complexity, size and sensitivity of a purchase, the more likely that a poor procurement decision will have adverse consequences. Although there are opportunities for fraud and corruption in the procurement processes, there is much that can be done to mitigate the risks by implementing the right prevention measures. The CCC promotes a 4-step approach for implementing control mechanisms that will assist the Council in preventing wrongdoing in procurement. The 4 steps are shown on this slide, but today I'll only focus on 2 of these. Undertake comprehensive procurement, fraud and corruption risk management, and develop and implement the right internal control activities. Fraud and corruption risk assessments help you and your staff understand your operating and environment risks and enable better decisions about how to manage them. If you know where your processes are vulnerable, you are better placed to design internal controls to prevent corruption occurring or reducing the impact if it does. The approach we recommend is to fully understand your procurement needs, the markets in which you must operate, and the environment in which you will use your procured goods or services. Based on these things, undertake comprehensive procurement, fraud and corruption risk assessments each year. Prepare and update your fraud and corruption risk register. Identify the specific procurement risks that could happen throughout the procurement life cycle. For example, the methods employed, your vulnerabilities, and other opportunities to commit procurement fraud. Map your internal controls to each risk in the register to ensure the identified risk is effectively treated. Determine your risk tolerance for the corruption risk relating to the procurement activities. Implement further internal controls to mitigate the risk to an acceptable level. Show in the register the residual risk ratings for the identified risks. Review your risks, their controls, your risk treatments, and review the risk register every time there is a change to your operations or the environment in which you use your procured goods or services. Once the procured fraud and corruption risk assessment is completed, use it to inform internal audit strategies. Internal audits are your opportunity to demonstrate that your control measures are working and to show that your procurement function is operating with probity. To deal with the identified procurement fraud and corruption risks, we have suggested internal audit activities. Review your procurement fraud and corruption risk assessment to understand your high-risk areas. Develop a targeted audit program that verifies specified procurement activities are conducted according to your procurement plan and the identified needs of your procurement proposal. Review the procurement activity to ensure it was conducted according to your policies and processes, and test the procurement activity against the effectiveness of your internal controls, including maintaining sufficient record keeping. The suggested internal audit activities also include: ensure your internal audit processes report on the effectiveness of your control mechanisms and that systematic improvements are captured in your risk registers. Test these controls to make sure they work. Make sure that improvements are updated into your procurement policy, procedures, processes, and employee training. Consider rolling internal audits across all procurement areas with full coverage every 2 years. Where you have projects or programs of work that are large, new to your organisation, or involve higher than usual risk levels, these should be audited more often from different audit approaches. It is very important to develop and implement the right internal control activities to meet the size and needs of your organisation. More details about this are available in our Corruption Risks in Procurement information sheet. I encourage you to review our information sheet for those details. However, in point form, the steps are: Procurement planning activities are opportunities to manage procurement with probity risks throughout the stages of the procurement process. A procurement plan outlines the steps to follow and the processes to implement for the particular procurement project to ensure it is conducted with impartiality, accountability, and transparency. Written specifications detail what you want to buy and what the suppliers are required to supply. These will minimise suppliers claiming variations from the contract. An evaluation plan controls the management and conduct of the evaluation and sets out responsibilities and a timetable for the evaluation process. Probity obligations and conflicts of interest considerations are your way of recognising that evaluation panel members may have associations with suppliers, either in business as former employees or through previous and current dealings as current employees. Probity and conflict of interest considerations are also your way to ensure that all decisions throughout the entire procurement process are transparent, defensible, well documented, and that the decisions will withstand public scrutiny. Evaluating offers from suppliers allows the selection of the offer that achieves the best performance for the money being spent. Record-keeping practices provide proof of procedural integrity and is an important means of managing procurement risks. Public authorities are required to make full and accurate records of their activities in accordance with Section 7 of the Public Records Act 2002. There are ways to reduce the risk of fraud and corruption. Improve procurement fraud and corruption risk assessment. Clearer procurement policies and processes. Internal audit strategies integrated with regular procurement audits. Procurement planning activities tailored to your organisation's business and operating plans. Improve training material relating to your organisation's procurement activities and needs. Conflict of interest, ethics and probity training for all staff involved in procurement processes, including managers and supervisors. Clear conflict of interest declarations that are easy to access and use. Enhanced documentation and record keeping. Clear and easy to follow information about how to make a complaint if staff or suppliers suspect wrongdoing. Thorough training in all of the above during employment induction and at least every 2 years thereafter. Procurement decisions involve choice or discretionary decisions. Discretionary decisions must be impartial, accountable and transparent in order to deliver services in ways that meet the public interest and in ways that ensure resources are not diverted because of corruption. Discretionary decisions are largely based on reason and judgment. However, good decisions must still be guided by well-structured policies supported by established precedents. This is not to say that decisions are constrained by these policies or precedents, because the nature of discretionary decisions means that they must cater for unique circumstances, which might call for different outcomes. The key to you making robust, defensible decisions is to document why you made the decision and identify and explain any deviation from the guiding policies and procedures. In these ways, you achieve impartial, transparent and accountable decisions that serve the public interest. Unfortunately, a small number of people in the public sector make decisions out of self-interest, corrupt decisions. Often, they are difficult to detect and in most instances would not likely ever come to light because the person who made the decision and the person who benefited are happy with the result. They can be difficult to prove because often the chosen option is arguably competitive with the alternative option and the decision maker is able to justify qualitative criteria for the chosen option. They're not difficult to monitor, but they can still be difficult to control because justifiable reasons can be manufactured to support the preferred option. For more information about this, please see our Prevention in Focus discretionary decision making. At their core, these decisions involve a conflict of interest and a failure to settle the conflict of interest, and these are illustrated in the next slide. These are some elements revealed by our investigations to a facilitated corrupt decision. The slide represents a work environment where a procurement officer decided to act to benefit themselves or someone else, or to cause a detriment. The most important point is that the procurement officer is required to make a discretionary decision by virtue of their role. The key points here are that the decisions are made by the person authorised to make them in circumstances where there was limited oversight and a low likelihood that the decision would be reviewed later. The simplest example in procurement involves the purchase thresholds in the agency policy They clearly state the number of verbal or written quotes that must be sought depending on the value of the work to be completed. It was an easy thing for the corrupt procurement officer to split the overall task into two complementary tasks that changed the requirement to get one written quote into the requirement to get two verbal quotes. The overall job required: supply materials and complete the work. But the procurement officer split these into task 1, supply materials, and task 2, do the work. The two verbal quotes were each sourced from two different business names. However, the procurement officer knew that both businesses were owned by the same person. The kickbacks came in the form of regular weekend holidays and cash payments. However, the big money is in the work that should be put to tender. The corruption occurs at the specification design phase, where the specifications for the work are manipulated to make it appear that there is some unique characteristic about the work that has the effect of narrowing the scope of options available in the market. This can change a project from a relatively open and competitive process to one that results in an invitation to tender from only one supplier, and this is mostly problematic in consultancies. Our investigations reveal that corrupt procurement officers accepted that their decisions might be reviewed. They just took the risk-based approach that their decisions would not be reviewed, or that if it was, that they could justify their choice to a level that made it at least as competitive as the next best alternative. They took this risk because, based on their experience, retrospective reviews rarely happened. Discretionary decision-making is delegated by senior management to other staff. This is necessary because efficient delivery of goods and services requires decision-making to be delegated to its lowest reasonable and practical level. But this should not be done blindly or without appropriate and effective controls. Controls or safeguards can be built into agencies' processes and should include documenting authorisations and delegations in writing, developing policies, procedures, and other guiding materials, identifying and recording critical or relevant factors as the basis for the decision and any other factors considered, implement regular due diligence reviews across suppliers, and implement an effective audit program. Always remember, your first best line of defence is a workforce educated to recognise corruptivity and empowered to report it. A couple of closing points about procurement. There is nothing free, everything has strings attached. No amount of free stuff enhances your ability to make better decisions. However, accepting gifts or benefits might have you reported for suspected corrupt conduct. You could lose your job or you could go to jail. Beware of those who want to be your friend or to give you something. Ask yourself, if I had a different job, would this person be my friend? Would I be offered this gift? Why am I being offered this gift? The answer is because you have something the supplier wants. In summary, our message goes out to those in three key areas of responsibility: the organisation, supervisors and managers, and procurement staff. At the organisation level, these are described as corporate governance issues relating to guidance, frameworks, and review systems. If your governance arrangements are well thought through and described, then staff will understand their sphere of operation and know what to do if they suspect some wrongdoing. If your review systems are functional, then this is an independent checking mechanism that gives confidence that your systems are effective. Managers and supervisors play a very important role in the oversight obligations to ensure policies and procedures are adhered to. The three key performance areas for managers are to make sure that processes are complied with, that procurement activities are monitored, and that if staff come forward with concerns, then they are treated seriously and confidentially. At the procurement officer level, work to the procurement plan. If you see faults or things missing from the plan, refer these to management. Don't change the rules without authorisation. It's likely you don't have the authority. Set procurement specifications so that everyone understands what your procurement needs are. Document your evaluations. This ensures a fair process. Document your decision and the reason for the decision. This aids in transparency and will ensure people understand why you made that particular supplier choice. Complete conflict of interest declarations. This demonstrates that you ran a clean process, free from bias. Cooperate with conflict of interest management plans. A workable plan that you stuck with also demonstrates that you ran a clean process, free from bias. Keep and store reliable and full records. These records will be your evidence of how you ran a procurement process, even years into the future when you have forgotten the details. Maintain professional distance from suppliers. maintaining professional distance is the best way to head off any claims that you were improperly influenced. Thank you for joining me today. I hope the information provided in this session and in the procurement information sheet and probity checklist available on our website is helpful. You will see that this is not an interactive session due to the size of today's audience. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at mailbox@ccc.qld.gov.au. A recording of today's session will be available on our website soon. Thank you.